The air inside the Portsmouth County Courthouse felt heavy, like it had soaked up decades of broken promises and bitter family disputes. It smelled of floor polish, old paper, and a cold kind of tension that settles in your bones. I stood at the defense table, hands resting lightly on the scratched wooden surface. I was completely alone. I did not have a briefcase, a paralegal whispering in my ear, or a fancy suit. I just had my old, pressed uniform and the truth. Across the aisle sat my father, Daniel. He looked exactly as he always did. Tailored suit, silver hair combed back perfectly. A man who believed his reputation was the most valuable currency on earth. Next to him was my younger brother, Julian. Julian was leaning back in his chair, whispering something to their high-priced attorney, Arthur Vance, and smiling a tight, arrogant little smile. The judge, an older man named Harrison with sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing, looked down from the bench. He shuffled a stack of papers and then looked directly at me. "Mr. Elijah Carter," Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "I see you are present, but I do not see counsel representing you. You understand the gravity of the civil claims brought against you regarding the family inheritance and the trust." Before I could even open my mouth to answer, my father leaned forward. He did not bother to lower his voice. He wanted the entire gallery to hear him. "My son can't even afford a lawyer," my father sneered, shaking his head in mock pity. "He thinks he can just walk in here by himself. No counsel, no case. Just that uniform and an attitude. It is an embarrassment." I did not flinch. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes locked on the judge. Judge Harrison stopped sorting his papers. He slowly lowered his glasses down the bridge of his nose and locked eyes with my father. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his voice dangerously even, "that will be enough from you." My father's jaw snapped shut. He sat back, crossing his arms, looking deeply offended that anyone would dare speak to him that way in public. Judge Harrison turned his attention back to me. "And you are choosing to proceed alone, son?" "Yes, sir," I replied. My voice was steady. It did not shake. Training teaches you how to control your breathing when everything around you is falling apart. The judge studied me for a long moment. It was not a look of pity or judgment. It was recognition. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Very well," Judge Harrison announced to the room. "For the record, he won't be needing one. He's all he needs." My father let out a scoff, muttering something under his breath to his lawyer. Arthur Vance smirked, a confident, predatory smile, and casually flipped open the first folder of my defense response. Vance was a man used to winning. He made his living tearing people apart on the stand, protecting the wealth of men like my father, ensuring every divorce and business split went his client's way. Vance glanced down at the top page of my file. His confident smirk vanished. I watched his eyes scan the first few lines. His fingers, which had been casually tapping a gold pen against the table, suddenly stopped. His knuckles turned white. He blinked hard and leaned closer to the paper, reading the lines again as if his brain refused to process the words. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a very expensive suit. "Wait," Vance whispered. It was barely audible, but in that quiet courtroom it carried. My father frowned and leaned toward him. "What is it, Arthur? What did he write?" Vance did not answer. He just kept staring at the page, his breathing suddenly shallow. He swallowed hard, looking up from the paper to stare directly at me. His eyes were wide with genuine shock. "Oh my God!" Vance breathed out, his voice trembling. "Is that really him?" My father froze. The arrogant posture melted away, replaced by a sudden, creeping confusion. He looked at his lawyer, then slowly turned his head to look at me. But to understand how we got to this exact second, to understand why a high-powered lawyer was shaking over a single sheet of paper, you need to understand the lie my family had been living for the past 20 years. You have to understand the shadow I grew up in. Growing up in the Carter household meant learning your place early, and my place was firmly in the background. My father was a man who measured success strictly by what the neighbors thought. If a tree fell in our yard and no one was around to see it, he would not care. But if a neighbor saw a single dead leaf on our front lawn, it was a crisis. I was the oldest, the workhorse. I was the one fixing the gutters, mowing the lawn, repairing the loose floorboards on the back porch. I did the heavy lifting, the dirty work, the quiet chores that kept our lives running. But Julian, my younger brother by 2 years, was the golden child. Julian was loud, charismatic, and knew exactly how to play my parents. If Julian got a B- on a test, my mother, Martha, would frame it and put it on the fridge. If I spent 3 weeks building a working radio from scratch and won a regional science fair, my father would barely glance at the certificate. I remember the day I brought that science award home. I was 12 years old. I stood in the kitchen holding the small wooden plaque, feeling a rare burst of pride. My father was drinking coffee, leaning against the counter. A neighbor, Mr. Donnelly, stopped by to drop off some mail. "How are the boys doing, Daniel?" Mr. Donnelly asked. My father smiled, chest puffing out. "Oh, fantastic. Julian just made the starting lineup for the football team. The kid is a natural. Scouts are going to be looking at him soon, I guarantee it. We are already talking about setting up a separate college fund just for his athletic camps." I stood right there in the kitchen, the wooden plaque heavy in my hands. My father did not mention me once. He did not even look in my direction. He did not lie to Mr. Donnelly. He just completely erased me from the narrative. I quietly walked to my room and put the plaque in a drawer. I never took it out again. My mother was no different. She enabled the dynamic, constantly rushing to smooth over any of Julian's mistakes while holding me to an impossible standard of silent obedience. Julian learned quickly that he could get away with anything as long as he smiled and made the family look good. The only person who saw through the facade was my grandfather. He was a quiet, rugged man who built the family estate from the ground up with his own bare hands. He watched the way my father obsessed over country club memberships and new cars while ignoring the actual foundation of our family. When I was 18, my grandfather sat me down on the back porch of the estate. He looked out over the sprawling acres of land, his hands rough and calloused. "Elijah," he said, his voice like gravel, "your father is a man who builds castles on sand. He cares about the paint job, not the plumbing. Julian is just like him. But you have calluses on your hands. You know how to work." I just nodded, not knowing what to say. "I am setting up a trust," my grandfather told me that day. "An inheritance that skip a generation. The estate, the land, the core of what I built. It goes into a blind trust, and when the time is right, you are the one who will manage it. Not your father. Not Julian. You. Because you are the only one who respects what it takes to keep it standing." I kept that secret. I did not want the money, and I certainly did not want the massive target it would put on my back. But I understood the responsibility. My grandfather knew that if my father got his hands on the deed, he would mortgage the land to buy a bigger boat or fund Julian's next failed business venture. When my grandfather passed away a few years later, the trust locked into place. My father was furious, but the lawyers made it ironclad. He was allowed to live in the main house and use the property, but the actual ownership and financial responsibility fell under the trust's strict guidelines, which I secretly monitored. But staying in that house, watching my brother get everything while I was treated like a hired hand, eventually broke me. I realized that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I tried to earn my father's respect, I would always just be the shadow cast by Julian's bright light. The day I turned 21, I made the decision that severed my ties with my family. I decided to enlist in the military. I did not do it out of anger or rebellion. I did it because I needed a place where the work you did actually mattered, where respect was earned through grit and loyalty, not through country club smiles and fake charm. I walked into the kitchen on a Tuesday morning. My father was reading the paper, and my mother was pouring coffee. Julian was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone, likely looking at cars he could not afford. "I signed the papers today," I said, my voice steady. "I ship out for basic training in 3 weeks." My father slowly lowered his newspaper. He did not look concerned for my safety. He did not look proud. He looked deeply, profoundly irritated. "You did what?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I joined the military," I repeated. Julian snorted from across the table, not even looking up from his phone. "What, couldn't figure out a real career? Taking the easy way out? Running away like always?" I ignored Julian and kept my eyes on my father. My father stood up, slapping the newspaper down on the table. "We do not do that in this family," my father said, his face flushing red. "People are going to talk. They are going to ask why my son is throwing his life away instead of going into business. You are doing this just to embarrass me, aren't you? Joining something that puts you in the spotlight for the wrong reasons." "It has nothing to do with you," I said calmly. "It is my life. I want to do something that means something." "You are choosing a life of being a grunt," he snapped. "You had options. You could have worked your way up in my firm. You could have had a normal life. Instead, you are choosing attention. You are choosing the wrong kind of attention." He was terrified of what his golf buddies would say. He was terrified that having a son in uniform did not fit the wealthy, upper-class image he spent decades curating. My mother finally turned around from the coffee pot. She wrung her hands, looking nervous, but she did not step in to defend me. "Elijah, please," she said softly. "Listen to your father. Don't make a scene. We already told the neighbors you were applying for a corporate job." I looked at the 3 of them, my father vibrating with selfish anger, my brother smirking at my supposed failure, my mother worried only about neighborhood gossip. In that moment, the final thread snapping was almost a relief. "I leave in 3 weeks," I said. "I am packing my things today." The day I left for basic training, my father did not come out of his office to say goodbye. Julian was out at a party. Only my mother stood by the front door. She did not hug me tightly or cry. She gave me a stiff, awkward pat on the shoulder. "Try not to get into trouble," she said. "Not be safe. Not, I love you. Just a warning not to ruin the family name." I picked up my duffel bag, walked out the front door, and did not look back. I stopped calling after the first few months. The conversations were always strained anyway. My father would only ask when I was getting out so I could get a real job, and Julian would just brag about whatever new promotion he got at our father's company. A promotion he did not earn. I found a new family in the military. I found brothers who would take a bullet for me, commanders who judged me solely by my actions, and a sense of purpose that filled the hollow space my family had left inside me. I rose through the ranks. I learned how to lead under fire, how to manage logistics in chaos, and how to stay perfectly calm when the world was exploding around me. I became the man my grandfather knew I could be. I just did it entirely in the dark, far away from the people who shared my last name. 4 years into my service, I was deployed overseas in a combat zone. The days blurred together in a haze of heat, dust, and adrenaline. We were running a forward operating base, and communication with the outside world was limited to sporadic satellite phone calls and delayed emails. It was a Tuesday evening when my friend and squadmate Matthew walked into our cramped barracks. He held a piece of paper in his hand and looked at me with a heavy expression. "Elijah," Matthew said softly, "message came through the wire for you. It's your grandfather." I took the paper. It was a brief, clinical notification from the Red Cross. My grandfather had passed away from a sudden heart attack. The funeral had already happened 3 days ago. I sat on my narrow cot, staring at the paper. My family had not even bothered to try and expedite a message to me. They buried the only man in that house who ever truly saw me, and they did not even wait to see if I could make the flight home. I did not cry. I folded the paper, placed it inside my footlocker next to the compass my grandfather had given me, and went back to my shift. But a cold, hard resolve settled into my chest. A week later, I managed to get a secure line and called Clara. Clara was an older, fiercely loyal woman who had been my grandfather's personal accountant for 30 years. She was the only other person who knew the intricate details of the blind trust. Elijah. Clara's voice cracked over the static-filled line. I am so sorry, sweetheart. I tried to tell your father to wait, but he insisted on rushing the service. It's fine, Clara, I said. I need to know about the estate. What is the financial situation? Clara let out a long, tired sigh. It is bad, Elijah. Your father's firm took a massive hit in the market, and Julian has been draining whatever liquid cash he can get his hands on. The property taxes on the estate are coming due, and they are massive. If they default, the county will put a lien on the land. Your father thinks the trust will just automatically pay it, but the trust accounts are empty because of his poor investments. My father and brother were living in a mansion they were about to lose because they were too busy trying to look rich to actually manage their money. Set up a blind payment channel, I instructed Clara. Direct it through a shell LLC so my name is nowhere on the paperwork. I will forward a portion of my military salary to that account every month. Use it to pay the property taxes in full. Do not let the estate go into default. Clara hesitated. Elijah, that is a huge chunk of your salary. You are paying to keep a roof over the heads of people who didn't even wait for you for the funeral. I am not doing it for them, I said, my voice hard. I am doing it for my grandfather. He built that land. I am not letting the county take it because my brother wants to pretend he is a millionaire. For the next 8 years, that is exactly what I did. Every single month, a massive portion of my pay went directly to the county tax assessor. I paid the taxes, the emergency maintenance bills, the insurance premiums. I kept the Carter estate pristine and legally secure. And my father and Julian, they had no idea. Clara doctored the internal family reports just enough to make them think the trust was generating magical dividends that covered the costs. They continued to live their lavish lifestyle, hosting parties on the lawn, completely unaware that the son they despised was the only reason they weren't sleeping in a motel. I survived my deployments. I received a promotion to a senior logistical command position. I even led a massive civilian evacuation during Hurricane Elias, pulling 47 people out of a flood zone when the local government collapsed. I received a commendation from the Department of Defense, a medal pinned to my chest by a general. I didn't call home to brag. I didn't send a picture. I just kept my head down and did my job. I eventually transitioned out of active duty and took a quiet civilian contracting role, settling into a small cabin a few towns over from my family's estate. I had my dog, Knox, a steady income, and peace. I thought the ghost of my family was finally behind me. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. I was in my backyard, wrestling with a warped piece of wood trying to fix a broken fence panel. Knox, my old German shepherd, was lying in the grass, watching me with tired, loyal eyes. My knee, damaged from a piece of shrapnel years ago, was throbbing in the damp air. I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. A process server stepped out of a generic sedan, holding a thick manila envelope. He walked up to the fence, checked a piece of paper, and looked at me. "Elijah Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, wiping grease off my hands onto my jeans. He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." He turned and walked away without another word. I leaned against the fence post and looked down at the heavy envelope. The return address was the Portsmouth Civil Court. I didn't need to open it immediately to know who it was from. The wolves were finally at the door. I walked inside the house, poured myself a black coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. Knox rested his heavy head on my knee. I broke the seal and pulled out the legal documents. The header read, Petitioner, Daniel Carter. Respondent, Elijah Carter. My father was suing me. I read through the dense legal jargon, feeling a mixture of dark amusement and profound disgust. My father, represented by the ruthless Arthur Vance, was petitioning the court to completely dissolve my grandfather's trust and strip me of my status as the legal trustee. They wanted full, unrestricted control of the estate and all its assets transferred to Julian. But it was the reasoning they used that made my jaw clench. I read the specific claims my father had signed under penalty of perjury. The respondent, Elijah Carter, has demonstrated a pattern of severe financial irresponsibility. The respondent has abandoned his familial duties, showing complete absence and neglect for 8 years. The respondent's conduct is unbecoming of a trustee and has brought undue stress and reputational damage to the Carter family. I read that last line twice. Conduct unbecoming. I let out a sharp, dry laugh that echoed in the quiet kitchen. Knox twitched his ears, looking up at me. "Well, buddy?" I said, tossing the papers onto the table. Apparently, paying their bills for 8 years while getting shot at makes me irresponsible. They were desperate. Clara had warned me a month prior that Julian's spending had spiraled completely out of control, and he was looking for a massive lump sum of cash to cover his debts. They had finally realized the trust held the only real equity left, and they needed me out of the way to liquidate the land. I could have called a lawyer. I had enough money saved to hire someone just as vicious as Vance. I could have let attorneys argue over loopholes and technicalities. But as I sat there, looking at the signature of the man who raised me, a signature demanding my total erasure, I knew a lawyer wouldn't fix this. This was not about money. This was about the truth. For decades, my father had controlled the narrative. He wrote the story of our family, and in his story I was the villain. I stood up from the table, walked into my bedroom, and opened the heavy olive-drab footlocker at the foot of my bed. The hinges creaked. Inside, folded with immaculate precision, was my dress uniform. The fabric was dark, the brass buttons polished, the ribbons heavy with history. I ran my hand over the fabric. People always think a uniform feels heavy. But it doesn't. It only feels heavy when you understand the weight of the actions it represents. I decided right then. I wasn't going to hide behind a legal representative. I wasn't going to pay someone to translate my life into corporate jargon. I was going to walk into that courtroom, stand in front of the judge, and force my father to finally look at the man he threw away. The next morning, I drove into the city to meet Clara. We met at a quiet diner far away from the country club circles my father frequented. Clara slid into the booth across from me, looking older and more tired than I remembered. She handed me a thick, locked briefcase. "I pulled everything, Elijah," she said, her voice hushed. "Every property tax receipt, every insurance premium, every maintenance bill you paid for the last 8 years. It is all documented. The Shell LLC leads directly back to your military accounts. The paper trail is bulletproof." "Thank you, Clara," I said, taking the briefcase. She hesitated, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "There is something else. Something I found when I was auditing the family's primary accounts to prepare for the subpoena. I printed it out for you. It's in the red folder inside." I clicked open the briefcase and pulled out a slim red folder. Inside were bank statements from the family's joint operating account, an account Julian had access to as the vice president of my father's failing firm. I scanned the highlighted lines. Massive withdrawals. $50,000 here, $20,000 there. All marked under vague categories like business development and client relations. But Clara had dug deeper. Attached to the statements were the actual routing numbers and wire destinations. The money wasn't going to clients. It was going to a luxury auto dealership. It was going to high-end jewelers. Julian had systematically drained the company's operating capital to finance a lifestyle he couldn't afford. He bought a Porsche 911 last month. "Elijah," Clara whispered, looking disgusted, "your father thinks the business is just experiencing a market downturn. He has no idea Julian is bleeding them dry from the inside. Julian is pushing this lawsuit against you because his creditors are circling, and he needs to sell the estate land to cover his tracks before your father finds out." I stared at the paperwork. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. My brother was robbing my father blind, and my father was taking me to court to give Julian the keys to the final vault. "Does Vance know about this?" I asked. Clara shook her head. "No. Vance only looks at the documents Julian provides him. Julian curated the financial history to make it look like you abandoned a struggling family, while he has been the hero trying to keep the lights on." A cold, calculated calm washed over me. I wasn't just walking into a defense hearing anymore. I was walking into an ambush, and I was bringing the artillery. "You need to hire a lawyer, Elijah," Clara pleaded. "Vance is a shark. He will twist your words. He will make you look like a monster." I closed the briefcase, the locks snapping shut with a satisfying click. "No, Clara. If I bring a lawyer, Vance will argue technicalities. If I stand there alone, they have to argue with the truth." I left the diner, drove to my old friend Matthew's security firm to make a few encrypted copies of the files, and prepared for the storm. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a flat, dull gray. I put on my uniform. Every button, every crease, every ribbon was perfectly aligned. I didn't wear it to brag. I wore it because my father had accused me of having conduct unbecoming, and I wanted the judge to see exactly what my conduct looked like. When I pulled into the courthouse parking lot, I saw them immediately. My father, Julian, and Julian's wife, Sarah, were walking toward the grand steps. Julian was adjusting the cuffs of his tailored Italian suit. Sarah was carrying a designer handbag that cost more than my first car. They looked like a magazine advertisement for generational wealth. I parked my old truck, grabbed the battered leather briefcase containing Clara's files, and walked toward the entrance. Our paths intersected in the long, marble hallway just outside courtroom 4B. Julian saw me first. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the uniform, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face before he quickly masked it with his usual arrogant smirk. He nudged Sarah, who looked at me with open distaste. My father stopped walking. He looked me up and down, his face tightening into a mask of pure irritation. He didn't see a decorated veteran. He saw a disobedient child who was ruining his aesthetic. "You actually showed up," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. He stepped into my path, forcing me to stop, and wearing a costume, no less. "What, are you hoping the judge gives you a discount for playing soldier?" I looked at Julian. I noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sweat gleaming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He was terrified. He was masking it with arrogance, but the fear of his debts catching up to him was eating him alive. "It's a uniform, Julian," I said calmly. "Something you earn, not something you buy with someone else's money." Julian's eyes flashed with anger. He took a step closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You have no idea what is going on here, Elijah. I have been keeping this family afloat while you were off playing in the dirt. Dad is taking the trust back today. It's over. You should have just stayed away." Sarah scoffed from behind him. "Honestly, Elijah, dragging us all to court like this, it is so selfish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break eye contact with my brother. I didn't file the lawsuit, Julian. You did. I'm just here to finish it." My father finally stepped forward, pushing past Julian. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "You are an embarrassment," my father hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You abandoned us. You contributed nothing. And now you show up here trying to make a scene. Today, the judge is going to fix my father's mistake, and we are going to erase you from that trust permanently." I held my father's gaze. I felt no anger toward him anymore, just a profound, crushing pity. He was a man defending a son who was actively destroying him, while attacking the son who was secretly saving him. "We will see what the judge thinks, Daniel," I said. I didn't call him Dad. I hadn't called him that in years. I stepped around them, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and walked into the courtroom, taking my seat at the empty defense table. The bailiff called the room to order as Judge Harrison took the bench. This brings us right back to the moment the judge told my father to sit down, and Arthur Vance turned pale looking at my initial defense filing. After Vance managed to compose himself, shaking off the shock of whatever he saw on my cover sheet, the judge ordered him to proceed with his opening statement. Vance was a professional. He quickly swallowed his panic, buttoned his suit jacket, and stepped into the center of the courtroom. He was ready to put on a show. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice smooth and practiced, filling the room with authoritative resonance. "We are here today to rectify a grievous error in judgment made nearly a decade ago. We are here to talk about family responsibility, stewardship, and duty." Vance began to pace slowly in front of the judge's bench, gesturing gracefully with his hands. "My client, Mr. Daniel Carter, is a pillar of this community. He has maintained the Carter family estate, preserved its legacy, and upheld its financial burdens. Beside him sits his youngest son, Julian Carter, a dedicated businessman who has poured his own sweat and equity into ensuring the family property remains intact." Vance stopped pacing and turned slowly, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at me. "And then, Your Honor, we have the respondent, Elijah Carter, a man who, despite being named the legal trustee of this historic estate, has demonstrated a chilling pattern of absence, neglect, and financial irresponsibility." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on my briefcase. I let him talk. "You never interrupt an opponent when they are busy digging their own grave. Elijah Carter left this town 8 years ago," Vance continued, his voice rising in manufactured indignation. "He abandoned his familial obligations. He has not contributed a single dollar to the upkeep of the estate. He has not attended family gatherings. He didn't even attend his own grandfather's funeral. He has chosen a path of total disconnection, leaving his father and brother to shoulder the massive financial weight of the property taxes and maintenance." My father nodded solemnly in his chair, playing the role of the aggrieved patriarch perfectly. "My client is not seeking to punish the respondent," Vance said, softening his tone to sound reasonable and forgiving. "We are simply asking this court to recognize reality. Elijah Carter is unfit to manage this trust. His conduct is unbecoming of the responsibility. We ask that full authority over the Carter family assets be transferred to Julian Carter, the son who actually stayed and did the work." Vance walked back to his table and sat down, looking immensely satisfied with himself. It was a beautiful narrative, clean, emotional, and utterly fabricated. Judge Harrison took a few notes, his face unreadable. He looked over his glasses at my father's table. "Thank you, counselor," the judge said. "Do you intend to call witnesses to establish this pattern of financial burden?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vance said, standing back up. "I call Julian Carter to the stand." Julian stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked to the witness stand with the easy, confident stride of a man who believed he owned the world. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and sat down. Vance approached the podium. "Julian, can you describe for the court the financial situation regarding the Carter estate over the last 8 years?" Julian let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if the memory of his hard work was physically exhausting. "It has been incredibly difficult, Your Honor," Julian said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "When my grandfather passed, the estate was hit with massive property taxes. Because my brother, Elijah, had completely vanished, the burden fell entirely on me and my father." "And how did you manage those burdens, Julian?" Vance asked gently. "I sacrificed," Julian said, looking earnestly at the judge. "I took money from my own business ventures. I drained my personal savings. Every month, I made sure those taxes were paid so my father wouldn't lose his home. It has put a massive strain on my life, my marriage, and my business. But I did it because I love my family. Unlike some people." He shot a glare in my direction. "So, to be clear for the record," Vance stated loudly, "you, Julian Carter, have been the sole financial provider keeping the estate out of foreclosure for the past 8 years? Yes, Julian said, without a single ounce of hesitation. Every penny came from me. My brother hasn't contributed a dime. It was a beautiful, spectacular lie. He delivered it with such conviction that I almost admired his sociopathy. Vance turned to the judge. Nothing further, Your Honor. The petitioner rests. Judge Harrison looked down at me. Mr. Carter, you do not have an attorney to conduct cross-examination. Do you wish to question the witness or make a statement? I stood up slowly. I picked up the worn leather briefcase from the table. The courtroom was dead silent. Every eye was on the man in the uniform who was supposedly a deadbeat. I don't have any questions for the witness, Your Honor, I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. I prefer to let the documents speak for themselves. I would like to make a statement and submit evidence to the court. Judge Harrison nodded. Proceed. I walked out from behind the defense table and approached the center of the room. I didn't pace. I didn't use theatrical hand gestures like Vance. I stood at attention, centered, grounded. Your Honor, I began. The petitioner has made several claims today. Claims of abandonment. Claims of financial neglect. Claims that my conduct is unbecoming of my family's legacy. I unlatched the briefcase. The sharp click-clack of the metal locks echoed in the quiet room. I pulled out a thick brown folder. It was heavy, filled with hundreds of pages of bank records and tax receipts. I agree with Mr. Vance on one thing, I said, looking directly at my father. Someone in this room has been lying about their financial contributions. Someone in this room is unfit to manage the Carter estate. I walked to the bailiff and handed him the brown folder. Your Honor, I submit Defense Exhibit A into evidence. These are certified, unredacted bank records, wire transfer receipts, and county tax ledger confirmations spanning the last 8 years. The bailiff handed the heavy folder up to the judge. Judge Harrison opened it and began to read. The silence in the room stretched out, tight as a bowstring. Mr. Vance and my brother claim that Julian has been paying the property taxes. I continued, my voice steady. If you look at page 4, Your Honor, you will see the origin of the payments. They do not come from Julian Carter's accounts. They do not come from my father's firm. Judge Harrison flipped to page 4. His eyes traced the highlighted lines. He frowned, flipping to the next page, and the next, cross-referencing the bank routing numbers with the county tax receipts. These payments, Judge Harrison said slowly, looking up over his glasses at Vance. They originate from a blind LLC. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. And if you look at the addendum on page 12, you will see the sworn affidavit from the managing accountant, Clara Higgins, proving that I am the sole owner and funder of that LLC. Julian shifted uncomfortably in the witness stand. The color began to drain from his face. For 8 years, I said, letting my voice rise just enough to fill the corners of the room. Every single property tax bill, every emergency maintenance fee, every insurance premium for the Carter estate was paid in full on time, and every single penny of it came directly from my military salary. My father let out a loud, disbelieving scoff. He stood up halfway out of his chair. That is a lie. He's lying. Julian, tell him he's lying. Julian didn't say a word. He was staring at the brown folder on the judge's desk like it was a live grenade. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down. Sit down, Mr. Carter. One more outburst and I will have you removed. My father sat down heavily, breathing hard, looking frantically between his lawyer and his golden child. Vance was hurriedly flipping through the copies of the evidence I had just submitted, his face turning an unhealthy shade of gray. Are you telling this court, Judge Harrison asked, his voice sharp with disbelief, that you, Elijah Carter, have been solely funding the estate from an overseas combat zone, while the petitioner was entirely unaware? Yes, sir, I answered. My grandfather asked me to protect the land. He didn't ask me to take credit for it. Arthur Vance was a cornered animal. He realized his entire case was built on a foundation of sand, and it was rapidly washing away. He stood up quickly, trying to stop the bleeding. "Objection, Your Honor," Vance stammered, pointing at me. Even if these financial documents are accurate, which we have not verified, it does not excuse the respondent's moral character. He still abandoned his family. He has a history of reckless behavior. We maintain that his conduct is unbecoming and a threat to the family's reputation in this community." Vance was throwing whatever mud he could find, hoping something would stick. He was betting that even if I paid the bills, he could still paint me as a degenerate soldier who didn't fit into polite society. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out a slim, official-looking folder bearing the seal of the United States Department of Defense. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through Vance's frantic shouting. "Mr. Vance keeps using the phrase conduct unbecoming. He claims my life is an embarrassment to my father's reputation. I submit Defense Exhibit B." I handed the folder to the bailiff. He passed it up to the judge. "What is this?" Judge Harrison asked, opening the cover. "That is my complete, unredacted military service record, Your Honor. Included are performance evaluations, deployment logs, and official commendations." Vance stepped forward, demanding his copy. I handed it to him. I watched Vance open the folder. I watched him read the first page. It was the same reaction he had at the beginning of the trial, only magnified. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and he looked at me not with anger, but with profound, terrified respect. Judge Harrison began to read aloud, his voice echoing in the stunned courtroom. "Elijah Carter, honorable discharge, rank of Major, recipient of the Silver Star for gallantry in action." The judge paused, looking up at my father, who was now gripping the edge of his table, his knuckles white. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, reading from a specific letter attached to the file, signed by General Wyatt, "Major Carter is officially recognized for his actions during Hurricane Elias, where he unilaterally coordinated the evacuation of 47 trapped civilians in a hostile flood zone, with 0 casualties. His actions bring the highest credit upon himself and the United States Armed Forces." The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The gallery, which had been murmuring throughout Julian's testimony, was completely still. I turned slowly to look at my father. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a 10-year coma. The son he had spent a decade calling a failure, a runaway, an embarrassment, was standing in front of him as a decorated war hero who had secretly been paying for the roof over his head. Does the petitioner's counsel have anything to add regarding Major Carter's unbecoming conduct? Judge Harrison asked, his voice dripping with icy sarcasm. Arthur Vance slowly closed the folder. He didn't look at my father. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at the floor. "No, Your Honor," Vance whispered, "but I wasn't finished. I hadn't even dropped the real bomb yet. The tax payments and the military record were just the setup. I was about to show the court exactly what Julian had been doing with the money he claimed he was spending on the house." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit vibrating in the ceiling. Judge Harrison's words hung in the air, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. He had just read my military record out loud. He had just told a room full of people, including the father who called me a runaway, that I was a decorated major who had saved 47 lives during Hurricane Elias. My father was gripping the edge of his table. His knuckles were bone white. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, like he was looking at a ghost. For 10 years, he had built a narrative in his head where I was a failure. He had convinced himself that my absence was proof of my selfishness. Now, that entire reality was collapsing right in front of him. "I don't understand," my father whispered. It was the first time I had ever heard his voice sound small. "He never told us. He never said a word about any of this." Judge Harrison looked down from the bench, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. "Major Carter's modesty does not negate his service, Mr. Carter. It simply highlights your profound ignorance regarding your own son. Arthur Vance, the high-priced lawyer my father had hired to destroy me, was sitting very still. He had pushed his chair back slightly from the table, creating a physical distance between himself and my family. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. But I was not finished. The truth about my service was just about clearing my name. I was there to protect my grandfather's legacy, and that meant exposing the infection that was actively destroying it. I reached into my battered leather briefcase one last time. I pulled out a separate, thick stack of papers bound by a heavy black clip. It was the final set of documents Clara had given me at the diner. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and completely level. "Mr. Vance stated earlier that my brother, Julian, has been the sole financial provider for the Carter estate. Julian testified under oath that he drained his personal savings to keep my father's house out of foreclosure." Julian's head snapped toward me. The arrogant smirk he had worn since we were children was entirely gone. His face was slick with sweat. He looked like a man standing on trapdoor, waiting for the lever to be pulled. "I submit Defense Exhibit C," I said, walking the stack of papers over to the bailiff. "These are the certified bank statements from the Carter family's joint operating accounts, which Julian manages. They include routing numbers, wire transfer receipts, and corresponding vendor invoices for the past 24 months. The bailiff handed the stack to the judge. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and began to read. I watched his eyebrows rise. He turned the page. He turned another. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. "Mr. Vance," Judge Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "did you review these financial statements before you filed this petition?" Vance stood up nervously. "Your Honor, I reviewed the financial summaries provided to me by my client. I was assured they were accurate representations of the estate's burdens." "Well, Counselor, your client lied to you," Judge Harrison stated bluntly. He held up a page from the stack. "These documents do not show Julian Carter paying property taxes. In fact, they show the exact opposite. They show a massive, systematic draining of the family's operational funds." My father stood up, his face flushing red. What are you talking about? Julian has been investing that money to keep the firm afloat." "He has been investing it, all right," Judge Harrison said dryly. He looked directly at Julian. "According to these wire transfers, Julian Carter withdrew $85,000 from the family trust's emergency reserve and wired it directly to a luxury European auto dealership. A month later, another $40,000 was wired to a high-end travel agency for a 3-week vacation in the Maldives." My father slowly turned his head to look at Julian. "A car? You told me the company needed liquidity for a new vendor contract. You bought a car." Julian was trembling. "Dad, listen, I can explain. It was a business expense. I needed to project success to land new clients. You always said we have to maintain our image. A Porsche 911 is not a business expense, Mr. Carter," Judge Harrison interrupted, reading the model directly off the invoice. "Neither is a $50,000 charge at a boutique jeweler, nor the extensive list of luxury expenses documented here. You have been systematically embezzling from your own family's accounts to fund a lavish lifestyle, all while your brother secretly used his military salary to pay the actual bills you ignored." The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. Sarah, Julian's wife, sat in the gallery with her mouth wide open. She looked horrified, not because her husband was a thief, but because she suddenly realized the bottomless well of money she had been enjoying was completely dry. My father looked like he had been physically struck. He stumbled back a step, hitting his chair. He looked at Julian, his golden child, the son he had worshipped and protected. He saw the sweat, the panic, the absolute cowardice in Julian's eyes. Then my father looked at me. He saw the man in the uniform who had been paying the price for his blindness. He finally understood. He was suing the only person keeping a roof over his head to give the keys to the person who was actively robbing him. "This is the moment that changes everything," the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Arthur Vance did not even try to formulate an argument. He began aggressively stuffing his legal pads and gold pens back into his designer briefcase. He was a man who cared about his win record and his license to practice law. He knew Julian had committed perjury on the stand, and he wanted no part of the fallout. "Your Honor," Vance said. His voice clipped and professional, completely devoid of the warmth he had shown earlier. "In light of this new evidence, which was clearly withheld from me by my clients, I have no further arguments to present. We withdraw the petition." My father whipped his head around. "Arthur, what are you doing? You can't just quit." "I am protecting my firm, Daniel," Vance snapped, not even looking at him. "You lied to me, both of you. You are entirely on your own." Judge Harrison picked up his wooden gavel. He looked over the courtroom, his sharp eyes settling on my father and Julian. "This court finds the claims against the respondent to be entirely baseless, frivolous, and deeply insulting," Judge Harrison announced. "The petition to dissolve the trust is denied with prejudice. Major Carter will retain full and sole authority over the estate, as stipulated by his grandfather. Furthermore, I am directing the court clerk to forward a copy of these financial transcripts to the county prosecutor's office to review for potential fraud and perjury charges regarding Julian Carter's testimony today." Julian buried his face in his hands. He was ruined. Judge Harrison looked directly at my father one last time. "Mr. Carter, you stood in my courtroom and claimed your eldest son was an embarrassment. You claimed his conduct reflected poorly on your family. Let me make something absolutely clear to you. What reflects poorly on a family is not what its members do. It is what you choose to ignore." Case dismissed. The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. It was over. The gallery cleared out quickly. People whispered as they hurried through the heavy oak doors, eager to share the gossip of the Carter family's spectacular downfall. Arthur Vance marched out without a backward glance. I stayed at my table. I slowly gathered my files, placing them back into the brown folder, and clicked the locks of my briefcase shut. The adrenaline that had been keeping me sharp for the past 2 hours began to fade, leaving behind a strange, hollow kind of peace. I turned around. My father was still standing at his table. Julian had already fled the room, rushing out into the hallway to try and do damage control with his wife. We were alone in the massive, quiet courtroom. My father looked 10 years older than he had when he walked in that morning. His shoulders slumped. The perfect posture, the arrogant tilt of his chin, it was all gone. He looked down at his hands, resting on the empty defense table. He slowly lifted his head and looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes anymore. There was no pride. There was only a devastating, crushing realization. "I didn't know," my father said. His voice was fragile. It broke on the last word. I looked at him. I felt no urge to yell. I felt no desire to rub my victory in his face. The truth had done all the heavy lifting for me. "You never asked," I replied quietly. I picked up my briefcase and walked down the center aisle. I didn't look back. I pushed open the double doors and stepped out into the brightly lit hallway. Julian was standing near the elevators. Sarah was a few feet away from him, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her face a mask of pure fury. As I approached, Julian turned to me. His eyes were wild, desperate. He stepped into my path, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Elijah, wait. Please just wait a second," Julian begged. His voice was frantic, completely stripped of the condescending tone he had used just 2 hours prior. "You have to help me. If the prosecutor looks into those accounts, I'm going to jail. Sarah is talking about a divorce. You control the trust now. You can authorize a payout. Just give me enough to cover the missing funds from the company account. I'll pay you back, I swear. I stopped and looked at my younger brother. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a spoiled, weak man who had never been told no in his entire life. He had spent his life stepping on me to elevate himself, and now that the ground was giving way beneath him, he expected me to catch him. You spent your life tearing me down to make yourself look taller, Julian, I said, my voice cold and hard. You stood under oath and tried to steal the last thing our grandfather built, and you used my name as a punching bag to do it. Elijah, we are family, Julian pleaded, tears actually forming in his eyes. No, I said. We share a last name. That is it. The bank statements are already in the court record. I am not authorizing a single cent from the trust to cover your fraud. You bought the car, Julian. Now you pay for it. I stepped around him. Sarah watched me walk past. She didn't say a word to me, but as I reached the elevator, I heard her sharp, furious voice tear into Julian. The facade of their perfect, wealthy marriage had completely shattered. I walked out of the courthouse and into the cool afternoon air. I took a deep breath. The sky was still gray, but the world felt lighter. I walked to my old truck, tossed the briefcase onto the passenger seat, and drove away. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance. I heard through the local grapevine that things were unraveling quickly for my family. The prosecutor's office had indeed opened an inquiry into Julian's finances. Creditors began calling the house. Sarah filed for divorce, taking whatever clean assets she could secure and leaving Julian to face the music alone. The Porsche was repossessed right out of the driveway of the family estate. I didn't reach out and they didn't reach out to me. I thought the silence was the end of it. I thought the courtroom had been the final chapter. I was wrong. The hardest blow was still coming. About 2 months after the trial, I was sitting on the back porch of my cabin. Knox was sleeping at my feet. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. My cell phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed my mother's name. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Even during the trial, she hadn't shown up. She hated conflict, preferring to hide in the house and pretend everything was perfect. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to let it ring, but another part of me, the small, stupid part that still remembered being a kid hoping for a hug, answered the call. Hello, I said. Elijah, my mother said. Her voice was thick with tears. She sounded exhausted. Elijah, please don't hang up. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It's Julian, she sobbed. He is losing everything. The lawyers are talking about prison time for the embezzlement. Your father won't even look at him. The house is so quiet, Elijah. It's terrible. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the tree line. Julian made his choices, Mom. He has to deal with the consequences. There was a long pause on the line. I heard her sniffle, trying to compose herself. Elijah, you have to help him, she pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. You have the trust. You have the money. You can pay off the company debts and make this all go away. If he goes to prison, the neighbors, the whole town will know. We will be ruined. Please, you have to save your brother. I closed my eyes. The familiar ache in my chest flared up. Mom, he tried to sue me. He lied on the stand. He tried to destroy my reputation to cover his own theft. And you want me to bail him out to save the family's image. I know he made mistakes, she cried out. But he was desperate. He was under so much pressure to maintain the lifestyle your father expected. He didn't mean to hurt you. Did you know? I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Did you know he was stealing from the company? Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence filled the line. Mom, did you know? I demanded, my voice hardening. I saw a bank statement a few months ago, she stammered, her voice breaking. I saw the withdrawals. I asked him about it. He told me he was just moving money around, that it was a temporary loan to himself. I didn't want to upset your father. His heart can't take the stress. I told Julian to put it back before anyone noticed. I felt the air leave my lungs. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles popped. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew he was stealing. And when Dad filed the lawsuit against me, accusing me of abandoning the family, accusing me of being a deadbeat, you let him do it. You let them drag me into court knowing Julian was the thief. You were willing to let them destroy me to protect him." "Elijah, try to understand," she begged. "You are strong. You have always been the strong one. You can handle it. Julian is fragile. If people found out what he did, it would break him. I was just trying to protect my family." "I am your family," I said. My voice was completely flat. The last remaining cord connecting me to that house snapped. There was no anger left, just a profound, empty grief. But I guess I never really was. "Elijah, please, do not call this number again," I said, and I hung up the phone. I sat on the porch for a long time as the sun dipped below the horizon and the yard plunged into darkness. Knox woke up, sensing the shift in my mood. He padded over and rested his heavy chin on my knee. I stroked his fur, taking deep, slow breaths. It hurt. It hurt worse than anything my father or brother had ever done to me. But in a strange way, it was the final closure I needed. The truth was out. The illusion of the perfect Carter family was dead, and I no longer had to carry the weight of their expectations. I was entirely, finally free. 6 months passed. The winter thawed into a bright, crisp spring. I didn't let the trust sit idle. I took my grandfather's estate and gave it a new purpose. I worked with the legal team to rezone a large portion of the acreage. Matthew, my old squadmate, and I partnered up to build a transition and support center for veterans returning to civilian life. We used the land to create workshops, temporary housing, and job training facilities. I poured my military salary, my savings, and the resources of the trust into building something real. Something that actually helped people, rather than just looking good from the street. I was on the property one afternoon, walking the fence line with Knox. We had just finished installing a new gate for the facility. The air smelled of fresh-cut lumber and blooming pine. I was wearing old work boots, jeans, and a faded t-shirt. My hands were calloused and dirty. I felt exactly like my grandfather. I heard a car pull up the long gravel driveway. I turned and watched a dark sedan park near the main office we had built. A man stepped out. It was my father. I hadn't seen him since the courtroom. He walked slowly toward me, leaning heavily on a cane I didn't recognize. He had lost weight. His tailored suit looked slightly too big for his frame. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch was gone. He was just an old, tired man. I stood by the fence, waiting. Knox sat faithfully by my side. My father stopped a few feet away. He looked around the property. He looked at the new buildings, the veterans working in the distance, the life that had been breathed back into the land his father had built. "You've done a lot with the place," he said. His voice was raspy. "I'm maintaining it," I said simply, "like I was asked to do." He nodded slowly. He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me. He looked at the dirt on my hands, the sweat on my brow. For the first time in my entire life, he didn't look at me with disappointment. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. His hand was shaking slightly. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver object attached to a short chain. It was my grandfather's pocket watch, the heavy, mechanical timepiece he carried every day of his life. My father held it out to me. "I found this in his desk after he died," my father said quietly. "I kept it. I always thought, I don't know what I thought. I think I kept it because I knew it was supposed to go to the man who actually understood what it took to build this family. I just didn't want to admit who that man was." I looked at the watch in his trembling hand. "Julian is facing 3 years," my father continued, his voice breaking. "The firm is gone. Your mother, she barely speaks to me. Everything I spent my life trying to protect, it was all fake." He took a step closer and gently placed the heavy silver watch into my dirty palm. "I spent my whole life worrying about what people thought of me," my father whispered, tears pooling in his eyes. I pushed away the only son who ever did the right thing. You didn't embarrass me, Elijah. I did that myself. I am so sorry. I stood there, feeling the cold metal of the watch in my hand. I looked at the broken man standing in front of me. I didn't feel the need to punish him anymore. Life had already done that. Thank you for the watch, Daniel, I said softly. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't tell him everything was okay. Because it wasn't. The past could not be rewritten. But I forgave him. Not for him, but for myself. So I could finally let it go. He nodded, understanding the boundary I had drawn. He turned around, leaning heavily on his cane, and slowly walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, disappearing down the road. Later that evening, I sat at the heavy oak desk in my new office. The window was open, letting in the cool night breeze. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old military compass my grandfather had given me when I was a boy. I placed it on the desk. Then, I took the silver pocket watch my father had just given me and placed it right next to the compass. Two instruments. One tells you exactly where you are going. The other tells you exactly how much time you have to get there. For years, I had let my family's expectations dictate my worth. I had fought a silent war, trying to earn the respect of people who were determined to misunderstand me. I carried the weight of their false narrative, believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just invisible enough, they would eventually see my value. But sitting there, looking at those two inherited items, I realized the most important lesson of my life. You cannot force people to see the truth if they are committed to a lie. You cannot change the version of yourself they have created in their minds to make themselves feel better. All you can do is step out of their shadow. All you can do is take the compass, look at the watch and start walking your own path. And eventually, the truth will speak for itself. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but it's one I felt I needed to share. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't on a battlefield. They are in our own living rooms. I hope this resonated with you in some way, maybe gave you the courage to set boundaries in your own life. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where you had to walk away from people who refused to see your worth? I would really love to read your experiences in the comments. And before you go, if you watched this entire video, I want you to comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. That is my special signal for the 1% Club. The amazing group of you who have the attention span and the empathy to stick with a story until the very end. When I see that W, I know exactly who you are, and I appreciate you more than you know. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and follow the channel. I have many more stories to share with you, and I would love for you to be a part of this community. Stay strong, trust your own path, and I will see you in the next one.
Oh, oh. All right. Ay, ay, ay. Boo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Okay. Whoo. A little bit of DB, shoulder press action. Now we've gone up in weight since the last time we've done this because we had enough reps to level up. So here we go. One more. You're gonna be a sweet dream or a beautiful nightmare. Okay. So 11, I think, what was that, 9? So we'll hang out here for a little bit. And we're gonna go do our belt squat and lateral raise. Even when... All right, I need to... I ain't going nowhere. No, I don't want all of them, dog. Right. There we go. Okay. Ready to pinch me. Might you fair? How do I move the panels around? All right, let's see if that works. Wake up. I want... How do I move the panels around? Isn't there a way to... How to move Twitch panels? Click and hold. Oh. All right, let's get into that belt squat now, huh?